Hello, I'm David Gruner, Director of Product Management at HData, and I've got with me Luke Ashton, our regulatory economist, and wanted to spend some time walking through our new Insights offering to provide you a little overview of what we've been working on over here at HData. So wanted to start with a little intro on the Insights marketplace. So Luke, if you don't mind. All right, so our marketplace is an ever-expanding home for what we call insights drivers. And we define a driver as smart, interconnected dashboards, purpose-built for the questions you need to answer. So right here in the marketplace, you've got the ability to take a look at our entire catalog of drivers, but also use it as the launch pad for any drivers that you've already purchased. You can filter by industry, only those you've purchased, or by keyword. So today we'd like to walk through a few examples of what a driver is and how some scenarios on how you might use one. And so I'm going to ask Luke if he can go ahead and open up the O&M gas driver. And he's going to walk you through some of the functionality and a use case for it. And we also have O&M drivers for the electric and oil industries as well. So Luke.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, so I really want to focus in on this gas O&M operation maintenance expense analysis. One of our big key items that we've heard from our customers is focusing in on the operation and maintenance expenses for a particular electric utility or gas utility or midstream pipeline or even oil midstream pipeline. So I wanted to highlight the gas one first. What I always recommend that our customers do is, this is pulling in data from the FERC Form 2 specifically, but we're pulling in data from the FERC Form 1 and 6 from every single year going back to 2011. So I recommend is this really shines when you're able to select a single year and compare it against a single company. So for example, if I want to focus in on 2019, like I just did, and focus on a company like A&R Pipeline, you can see the driver changing based on the filters that I've set. And we have a few different financial metrics on O&M. On the top line here, you're looking at A&G per dollar revenue and per volume in decatherms. So A&G is just administrative and general expenses. That can be the paper for the printer, the birthday cake in the office, or even the desks and tables within the office that you're buying. But then you're also focusing in on the actual O&M aspect of it. So how much are we spending in maintaining in this case, midstream natural gas? So how much are we spending on maintaining the pipelines? How about the gathering stations, compressor stations? All of that stuff feeds into this overall metric. And we're going into, on the left-hand side here, storage O&M per stored decatherm, storage O&M for the revenue that is earned from storing gas. And you can even go into the transmission line O&M per transmitted decatherm and the revenue from transmission. And you can see a breakdown of how these expenses are proportional to the overall expenses for the company. So you can see that most of this is going into transmission expenses, and then a smaller portion is natural gas storage expense. But what's great about this is, and this is kind of highlighting at what David talked about a little bit earlier, this is just one dashboard out of another series of connected dashboards within this O&M driver. So, reiterating that point that a driver is multiple different dashboards tied together. And what that means is we can tie these dashboards together to really dive into the nitty-gritty items of O&M. So for example, if you're familiar with the FERC Form 2, you'll know that O&M expenses is filed on page 317 of the annual filing. That can be a pain to go through. So what we've done with this is we've actually taken all of these line items and you can roll them up or down to subtotals depending on where you want to go into. So if we want to go into the production side of things, we can click on that little plus icon there. You can see here that it's actually going into all the individual items that are filed under production. So we can go into purchase gas, we can go into gathering, we can go into manufactured gas or other gas supply totals and dive into that. And then we can roll it back up. And if we want to change gears, we can then go into the transmission side of things and start opening up the transmission operation side of things. And here's the maintenance for communication system expenses for every single company that files with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. What's great about that is I can select any year that I want or any company that I want. So let's say I want to select a few other companies. So I'm going to look at ANR and say I want to look at El Paso. So I'm looking at 2 companies, but this isn't just looking at the numbers. What I also want to show is you can visualize these numbers going all the way back to 2011, or in some cases 2010. So say, for example, I want to compare main expenses. All I got to do is click on the name of that term, and it brings up a visualization of that data point going all the way back to 2011 between ANR and El Paso. So it's not just looking at a single company or maybe just the raw data for a series of companies. You can also compare companies in visualizations and immediately share those insights to whoever you report to. And you can do that in a couple of ways. You can export it as a PowerPoint or a PDF if you need it to throw it into a visualization, or you can also expand the details on this, see the data feeding into that visualization, and then you can export it as a CSV or an Excel. So if you need to manipulate the data however you need to, you can download it, do what you need to do with it, and then throw that into a visualization, a PowerPoint, or bring the insights that you want to show to whoever needs that insight. So that is just a quick little look into O&M gas. And David, when we talk about a lot of these drivers, we've focused first on gas, but it isn't just gas that we're focusing on. So we're looking at oil and electric, and I was wondering if you wanted to bring in some insights from the development on that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Why don't we take a look, transition over to the oil side of things and look at the oil cost of service analysis, or what others might know as page 700 FERC Form 6. This driver is really focused on making page 700 more digestible and something that you can just a lot more easily, compare and see what's going on with more than just a single company and a single form. So why don't you jump into that one?
Yes, sure thing. So I really like this one because you can focus in on a specific company. And I would say this is more of a true dashboard instead of a driver, because it's a single look at all the information that's coming from the page 700. So you're looking at rate base and return on rate base. And if you're within the heavily regulated space like midstream oil and gas and electric utilities are, this will be a metric that you're very, very familiar with, because this is a metric that you ultimately negotiate with your regulator of how much you can actually earn from your rate base or your return on rate base. So it gives you a quick look at how rate base is calculated between all these different entities. And within the oil industry specifically, this is unique to the FERC Form 6 where oil companies file, because they actually file a rate base where you don't see that number within the FERC Form 1 and 2. So we're looking at rate base, return on rate base, and then various interstate metrics, expenses, and then of course the revenue requirement / cost of service. So ultimately how much money that midstream pipeline in this case can make. So we can filter it to say, I want to look at interstate operating revenues. How has Marathon been on operating revenues going all the way back to 2011? You can see they're making a steady increase. Same thing for expenses. If you want to look at the O&M expenses for that company, you can see it's kind of fluctuated from year to year. It really depends on what the company is doing in that particular year or reporting period of how that data is going to come up. So if you want to relate it back to 2016, maybe something happened that they took some pipelines offline and their O&M expense decreased. That may be one case. And that's where it really requires diving into their FERC Form 6 and looking at the narrative that they've included in that form. So this gives you an idea of where to look for information and where to look for potential areas of interest. And then you can dive into the FERC form itself, having that insight to go in with. You're not just searching blind in a FERC form. You are actually informed before you actually engage in that heavy research.
All right, thanks, Luke. Why don't we jump into electric then, and specifically transmission, and talk a bit about that.
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, switching gears into electric, and actually I want to relate this one to a recent conference that I went to. So last week I attended the NARUC conference. So for those in the electric industry, this is probably very familiar to you, but it's basically a conference of various state regulatory agencies. So, public service commissions, public utility commissions, and then also various regulators and industrial partners that engage with these state regulators. So they had a summer policy summit, and the big theme that I identified in a lot of the sessions was, how are you going to invest in transmission and distribution infrastructure and assets? Especially going forward, now that we're focusing on distributed energy resources, we're focusing on making sure that EVs are being able to be charged. So we can say, I want to look at a particular company like, let's do American Transmission Systems. That's going to be a transmission specific company that files with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And then I want to look at, we only have data for them for 2011. So we can see all of their information from 2011 and dive into that. And you can see they had one unique company. They filed 533 total lines. They had roughly 3,000, maybe a little bit over 3,000 to 4,000 line miles that they're actually filing with the FERC. And you can see how that actually looks spread out for the mileage by the supporting structure. So if you're familiar with the transmission line reporting within the FERC, you can know that it's actually very, very disparate of how they report the supporting structure. So we've actually taken a lot of that really manual effort in cleaning that data and have done it for you. So it's at a click of a button, they can now access all the supporting structure information and map to a clean idea of supporting structure. So H-frame, steel or wood, single pole, tower, underground. You can easily find that information here. You can filter it by the total line miles. So if you want to look at all their lines that are less between 0 and 50 miles, go ahead and list that out. So it gives you an idea, as companies are increasingly investing in transmission infrastructure, where exactly is that investment falling? Is it falling within very, very large, long transmission lines? Is it falling within like the single pole or H-frame infrastructure? You can easily find that information here and then even get into the specific lines if you need to.
All right. And next, why don't we jump into the plant efficiency driver? And along those lines, Luke, why don't you, can you explain a bit about where all this data is coming from, both from the plant efficiency driver as well as the rest of the drivers we've talked about?
Yeah, actually, it's a really good point, because all of the drivers that I've shown so far have come from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. But what makes this plant efficiency driver unique is that it's combining FERC data with Energy Information Administration data. So, the FERC and the EIA are separate organizations, all under the Department of Energy, but they're capturing data in their own unique way. But they capture data on a very similar level. So what I've kind of seen with a lot of this data is the EIA primarily captures data that's operational in that sense. So we can see, the summer capacity for a plant, but that's not necessarily reported in the FERC Form 1. The FERC Form 1 primarily concentrates on the financial side of things. So really getting into the nitty gritty of the financial side. So we've actually harmonized those data sets to match those data sets, so you can actually look at a single plant and understand the finances and the operation. So if I want to focus in on, say, I'll look at Alabama. We had actually designed this driver based on input from our design partnership with Alabama Power. So let's go ahead and focus in on some of the plants that we have within here. So for example, if I want to focus in on a plant, you can see of all of the plants, we have natural gas turbines, conventional hydro, we got a nuclear plant within here, steam, coal. But say, for example, I want to focus in on this plant near Mobile, which in this case, this is the Berry plant. I can go ahead and click on that plant. And as I dive into the lower part here, this is where we start getting into the nitty gritty data points from the EIA and the FERC. So this generator fuel source table, that's coming from the EIA. We can actually understand on a generator level, does it have multiple fuel sources? And if it does, what's the primary and secondary? Otherwise, if it doesn't have multiple fuel sources, it'll just list it as the primary. But you can actually see that it's a mix of natural gas and other fuel sources, but it's tied to a particular generator. From there, we can even understand what are some of the financial metrics that are impacting this plant. So we can look at, say, the cost of the plant. Go ahead and zoom in on that. now we can see the cost of the plant between 2020 and 2021. Major increase in the cost. That's probably because they may have updated to include a few new generators that were opened between 2020 and 2021. And then from there, we can even understand the nameplate capacity, summer capacity, winter capacity, the power factor for each and every generator from that plant. What this allows us to do is from there, you don't even necessarily need to dive into a plant or even a company in order to generate comparison groups or peer groups. You can do peer grouping on financial metrics for plants now, where traditionally it's been relegated to the company level. So what that means is we can say, hey, I want to look at the plant comparison. Here's all of the finances for the berry plant going back to 2011 to 2021. And we can filter based on the cost of the plant. So if I want to look at years that are focusing in on, say, other plants, I'll go ahead and clear that one there. And now we're getting a look at all the plants within the data set. And I want to look at any plants that had a maintenance expense of between, say, 9 million, and go ahead and move this number down here a little bit. Want to make sure that I'm actually selecting a single year. That's very, very important to note. You want to make sure that your time period, your time scale that you're looking at is correct. So now you can say, okay, I'm looking at all the plants between roughly $9.3 million in maintenance to $63.7 million in maintenance. And here's a list of those plants that has that range for 2020. So right off the bat, Alabama Power got a couple of hits here. The James H. Miller, that's actually their nuclear plant. You got EC Gaston, and then we get a few others from Duke Energy Carolinas and Florida, Florida Power and Light. You got the Sanford plant. So from here, you can actually say, if I'm looking at my plant, and if I'm Alabama Power in this case, if I'm looking at one of my plants, how is that stacking up against this peer group of other plants across the country? And if I need to, I can even focus in on the plant type. So if I want to focus just on the nuclear, there's 3 nuclear plants right off the bat. So now I can actually say, hey, I want to look at specifically the nuclear plants and then start comparing based on maintenance expense. And then from there, we can even go a little bit further. If we want to, it's not just looking at the raw data. It's of course being able to benchmark on that information. So if I want to look at a particular company, now we can actually benchmark my company as Alabama Power against the entire industry or data set average based on power production expenses, electric expenses, and maintenance expenses. So having this ability to really dive into both the EIA side of the information, in this case, what I'm showing right now on the screen is the FERC side of the information, you're able to understand based on, say, the operating capacity or the nameplate capacity of various plants, which one's actually more efficient in these financial metrics. So it's really being able to understand things on like a per kilowatt hour basis, or being able to narrow down the range of plants that you're looking at. And then from there, you can start deriving insights from it and tying it to real world events. If you're looking at, say, companies like PG&E, they're going to be having a lot of real world events tied to wildfires. So it's being able to look at that information, tie it to real world events or insights that your company is seeing, and being able to support that with the data you can get from our insight solution.
Luke, thanks so much for that overview. Just to wrap it up, we are only scratching the surface of this insights offering. These drivers are only the beginning, and I am really looking forward to having another opportunity in the future to showcase what we are going to be continuing to build. So thank you.